right, everyone, welcome back to another amazing episode of The Power of Progress. I won't keep our amazing guests waiting awkwardly while I read the bio too long, but welcome Carly to the show. Carly is a strength nutrition and health behavior change coach and the owner of Moxie Barbell. Her mission is to help you find the version of health and fitness that fits your lifestyle and provide you with the education needed to learn how to adapt to the habits through different seasons of your life. Carly, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to do this. Perfect. So look, I want to jump right into it because you and I are basically competitors. I think most people probably go with you versus going with me, which is fair enough. But we're both in the fitness field. We both kind of have a behavior change background. We're both certified trainers. We've both been doing it for a while. And what makes us, I think, different than most people is inherently we focus on the psychology. Now, I think you are a bit more trained on the specifics of the psychology, and I kind of just go with what I've been doing just for a long time. And so it's kind of like
Sure.
that, certification versus like, here's what we're gonna do. And I didn't realize my thing was called a certain thing. And so,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing cognitive behavioral theory and all that stuff. I happen to be doing it. So I want to dive into it. So you're all about the psychology of habit building, habit changing, whatever it might be. So first off, what is that?
Yeah, good question. So I will say I come at it, I think, a little bit of both ways. So I come at it definitely from the educational lens. Like I double majored in undergrad, but one of my undergraduate degrees was in psychology. And I've done now a couple of certifications in basically what's called health mindset coaching. So I have to give a shout out to Casey Jo Arvidas, who coaches the health mindset coaching certification, but it's all about how you apply psychology and all of these different theories of behavior change, but through a health and fitness lens. So when I really think about, and it's a vague question, right? What is psychology in the realm of health and fitness? But really, I think for most people, what it comes down to is like, you're not hiring a coach because you need somebody to give you a training plan or you need somebody to tell you what your macros are. Sure, you might think that that's what you need, but there is so much information around now that you could have ChatGPT spit that out for you and you'd have something at least roughly that you'd be able to follow. People hire a coach because they know what they should be doing, but they don't know how to actually follow through with it. They're struggling with adherence and overall consistency. There's a lot of obstacles because life inevitably is going to throw things your way. So the way that I really leverage the psychology component is, why do you make the decisions that you make? Why do you have the actions that you have? Why are you doing certain things and why are you not doing certain things? And then how do we understand that through the lens of various different psychological principles? And how do we help you make a mindset shift so that you can then adhere to these health behaviors that you want to ultimately be able to change your life?
I'm gonna steal a lot of that. That's really good. But if you've been listening to the show for any amount of time, like the first half before she said the word psychology, like was literally like, that's why are you doing this? Why are you not doing this? What's happening? How do we get you like, it's everything that I talk about all the time. So I'd love to hear it. And this is amazing. So because I'm gonna learn a lot on this as well. So let's
I
just
hope
dive in.
so.
So the psychology, there's a couple of different terms that you kind of threw at me before the show, and I'm like, we probably should talk about these because I don't really know exactly what they are. So maybe like
Sure.
as briefly as appropriate.
Okay.
What is so you'll see terms like CBT, right? Cognitive
Mhm.
behavioral theory. You'll see if-then planning. You'll see habit stacking. Everyone talks about it's the new thing, habit stacking. And you'll talk about WOOP, WOOP. So like maybe one at a time, what are these things? And maybe like one thing about like why they might be valuable.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about three of them in tandem
Great.
because if then planning and WOOP both fall under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy.
Okay.
So cognitive behavioral therapy is just basically a underlying psychological principle that is used very often in like modern day psychotherapy and like what your typical therapist might do. And it's really just one theory of behavior change. And the idea of it really is that like we've got all these different thoughts that are jumbling around our brain at any given moment on any given day. And it's really figuring out, okay, like if I'm having this thought and it's, say I'm having like a really negative thought, right? How do I, instead of like giving into that negative thought, how do I reframe that in a more positive way? And how do I create plans around potentially negative things that might arise so that it doesn't derail me. And so I think walking through the WOOP method and walking through if-then planning will give you a little bit more of like a tangible of how do I actually apply CBT to my own life. So WOOP is basically like the underlying way that I apply CBT with a lot of my clients. And what it stands for, it's an acronym for Wish, Outcome, Obstacles, Planning. So you can think about that as basically the way that you would walk through visualizing what you want your life to look like, what outcomes you want to see, and then how you go about setting goals for those things. So when I have a client sign up for me, one of the first things that I do is I have them fill out a form where we walk through this WOOP method, but in the context of the goals that they have and the changes they want to make in their life. So it looks something like, if we start with W, wish. What do you wish that your life would look like? If you think about what your life looks like right now, and then you think about this idealized version, right? You hired a coach for X reason. What do you want it to look like? Maybe it's that you've lost 20 pounds and you have so much more energy and you're excited to go for a hike and you feel like you can go skiing and you can play with your kids and whatever all of the things are. What is like the idealized version of what you want your life to look like? Then you break it down. Okay, let's get a little bit more concrete. So what are the outcomes that you want to see very specifically? So I want to lose 20 pounds of body fat. I want to go for a walk for 20 minutes every single day. I want to, whatever it is. What are those very specific outcomes? But then those outcomes don't exist in a bubble, right?
Yeah.
Like life happens. It's not if obstacles come up, it's when obstacles come up. So the next O is obstacles. So if you think about what those outcomes are, okay, what are the obstacles that are most likely to come up that are going to derail me? Because we don't want to ignore those things. We want to plan for them. And so we come up with all of those obstacles. Maybe I have a stressful week at work. Maybe I get sick or the kids get sick. I've got to travel. There's a holiday, whatever those things are. And then the P in WOOP is plan. So you figure out what those obstacles are and you create a plan for it. And that's where the if-then planning comes in. That's kind of one of the main strategies of that like obstacles plan portion of the WOOP method. So if X obstacle arises, then I will Y. And so you basically come down to these are the obstacles and here's the plan so that I still stick to the outcomes that I want to support the wish that I have.
There's a lot there. I love that.
Yeah, not super short, but
no, that's great.
that's
No,
the best I got.
It's good. There's a lot of information to unpack to kind of see how we can use it in a practical sense. I didn't realize I was using the WOOP method for such a long time, not in that order necessarily, but like that's the method. So it's interesting to kind of see that there's a a psychological, I guess, term or the planning method that you can use for that. So a couple things you hit on, I want to kind of double back to. So one, you said, we have this, we can create this negative self-talk. And one of the problems I have found is people don't realize that they have negative self-talk. And they kind of like, they make up rationalizations in their head. And I say make up as in, money, time, energy, stress, whatever, right? Not that they're not real, but we make them worse than they potentially are because there is an underlying negative factor of an obstacle in our way that we are trying to avoid. So for example, just, I'm going to kind of get your take on how do we get to people unlocking the idea of, okay, oh, that's actually a negative talk versus no, I'm just tired. I'm just stressed. So for example, your boss, throws a meeting on your calendar and, for whatever it is, and you're super stressed out, you're really annoyed. And so what happens? Well, you allow that stressor to say, you know what? I had a rough day. I'm tired. I don't want to do this. So I deserve a day off. I don't need to go work out today, right? That's not negative self-talk to that person. That's a real rationalization from XYZ. Now, obviously, there's probably some sort of underlying obstacle in the way, but how do you get people to start realizing that what they're doing is a negative self-talk, at least mechanism that is creating an obstacle in their way?
Good question. There's so many directions that I could take that. Two things that I will say before I answer the question, because as you were talking, right, and you said so many of us have this negative self-talk, right? And what you're really hitting on there is like that is a very common human thing. And there's actually, again, another psychological term for this. There's a very common cognitive distortion or a bias called the negativity bias that all human beings are susceptible to. We all have this tendency to overweight the negative and then drastically underweight the positive. So there's that piece. And then then the second one that you touched on is like, okay, I had a really stressful day. My boss put a meeting on the calendar, but now I deserve this reward, right? I deserve to have the day off. That's another really common cognitive bias. It's called the heavens reward fallacy. The
Huh.
idea that if I work really hard, then I automatically deserve a reward. I should get something that comes from it. And I will say, whether it's identifying negativity in yourself, whether it's identifying poor eating habits, whether it's anything, the first step is always going to be building awareness around whatever that thing is. So if we take the negative self-talk example, you can't change what you don't know needs changing. So the first thing you can really do is just start to be more aware of when you are being really hard on yourself, or when you are having some of those self-critical thoughts. And some of that comes from, right, a coaching relationship, where I hear it in check-ins all the time, where clients will say, oh, well, I did this and this and this, but I did this. And so the rest of the week it sucked and
It's
I wasn't so good.
terrible. Yeah.
Exactly. And so much of my role is like being a cheerleader and reminding you, hey, like, here's all the things that went really, really well. Yes, there was a setback, but how can we work around that, or how can we not let that completely derail us? So I will say the first big thing there is awareness. And then the second one, I'm going to introduce another psychological theory for you, which is acceptance commitment therapy, or ACT
Acceptance.
for short.
Act.
Yeah.
Okay. Act.
ACT is easier. And basically the idea with ACT is that typically when we have a negative thought, we let that thought dictate our actions. So I feel stressed, and because I feel stressed, I cannot go to the gym. I need to go and eat some ice cream and lay on the couch instead. You have that feeling of stress, you let it dictate what you do. The idea with ACT is that you can have the thought. We're not going to push the thought away. We're not going to pretend it's not there. It's there. It's really hard to distract yourself and pretend it isn't, but we can acknowledge you can have that thought and not let it dictate your behavior. So you can be stressed and still go to the gym. You can be tired and still do your meal prep, right? You can feel like you're not doing a very good job and still show yourself a little bit of compassion. So if I was to break it down into 2 steps, number 1, start increasing the awareness around it. Even if you feel kind of powerless to change it at the outset, just notice when it's happening. Okay, I'm having a critical thought. I don't feel like I can change it right now, but it's there. And then as you start to progress and increase the level of awareness around it, start to challenge yourself of like, okay, I'm feeling that thing, and do I have to let that feeling impact the behavior that I'm deciding to do?
Absolutely. You have to have the bag of Cheetos if you're having a bad day. There's no other option. You can't not sit on the couch instead of going to the gym. There's just no other way. That's
For
great.
sure.
Wow, that's a lot of great information. I hope people kind of
Yeah.
listen to this a couple different times, because there's a lot there it's so interesting that, and I don't have a psychological background, right? I did this just from coaching and kind of learning it and kind of saying, okay, like, this is the obstacle. How do we do this? And going from there. So it's interesting to see kind of the connection points that you have and what I have and kind of how we do it. I forgot the fallacy that you called it, but I call it the red light fallacy, where it's basically like when we overvalue the negative versus the positive.
Negativity bias.
Negativity bias, because what happens when you're going to work, right? Let's say you have 10 red lights on the way to work and you hit 6 of them, you're going in, I can't believe I hit every red light on the way over there. But the reality is you're skipping the 4 green lights that you did have. And so you're not really taking into account the positives. Or when someone else does something good. So if someone tells you a story and they're like, I accomplished this thing, what's the first thing that you do? Oh my gosh, that's so great. Good job. That's amazing. But if you were to do the same exact thing, you're like, oh, I suck. I'm terrible. I'm horrible. It's like, so we are definitely harder on ourselves than
100%.
we're harder on other people. And therefore it's very easy to see. They say, wait, why am I being so hard on myself? And I think that negativity bias is a really interesting concept that you kind of introduced there.
We struggle with self-compassion as humans. And again, like, I don't want anybody to think that I'm approaching this from like my royal throne of like, I never do that. I'm my own worst critic by a landslide. I am so critical in my head, right? I'm not perfect at it. But the thing that I do is I try to acknowledge when it's happening, and I try to give myself a little bit of grace and really try to approach things with a little bit more curiosity. That's the fun part about all of this, is like, just really get curious. Because if we really get down to like the basics here, any thought you're having, any decision that you're making, anything you're doing because you're either trying to solve a problem or you're trying to avoid some kind of discomfort. And it could even be said that avoiding discomfort is in itself trying to solve a problem. So get curious, become a little bit of a detective. If you're really like talking crappy about yourself and you're having this really negative self-talk, that's really interesting. I wonder why that's happening, and get kind of curious about it. Again, you don't have to change it, but just like start to be aware of it and start to be like, I wonder why that's going on. And it really does start to take a little bit of a power away from it when you start to approach it a little bit more detective style.
Would you say that creating context around the idea of creating self-awareness? So for example, I think people might have a hard time with, okay, you're saying create self-awareness. How do I create self-awareness other than just stopping my own thoughts in its tracks? Is one way to create self-awareness is to, if you do an action that is not aligned with the goal that you have set, you should take a step back and then self-reflect for 5 seconds. Okay, what am I thinking right now? Is that a good way to kind of get it started? At least I feel like a lot of people have trouble getting it started. And
Yeah,
it's kind of this weird ether, hey, just have more self-awareness. Well, how
for
do I,
sure.
and like, because a lot of times if they don't know they're being negative, then they're not going to want to be self-aware. So the question is, how do I get them to know they're being negative? And my way is, okay, did you do what you said you're going to do? No. Start thinking about it when you make the decision not to do it. And that's the negativity. That's the self-awareness aspect starting point, the catalyst.
For sure. Yeah. Again, there's a couple of different like approaches here, but like you're right that in the beginning, just being aware of it is really hard. And that's because your brain has been conditioned to do things the way that you are doing them currently. Like your brain reinforces the pathways of the things that you do most frequently, and it prunes away the things that you don't. So if you are somebody that is always talking to yourself negatively, your brain is reinforcing that pathway constantly, and you're not getting reinforcement for that positive one. So really what you have to do in the beginning is start to take effortful steps, right? To consciously do these things so that then you get to a point where they do become more habitual. But what I'm hearing you say is like, right, how do I actually do that? How do I do the work until it becomes habitual? And what you're saying is like a version of self-monitoring, which is one of the most effective things that you can do in the beginning. So self-monitoring basically just means that like you are being aware of your own actions, but you are writing them down. You are like creating checkpoints with yourself. So let's say your goal is to take a walk every morning before work, right? Or that's the behavior that you said you were going to do. So you might write down in a journal or in a notes app on your phone, literally at the end of the day or before you go to work, did I go for a walk this morning, right? And then you can break it down even further. Did I lay out my clothes before the walk? Did I put my shoes by
Mm.
the door? Did I pick a podcast I was going to listen to? And then you can start thinking, okay, today I laid my clothes out, check. I didn't pick the podcast, but I still went for the walk. Okay, tomorrow, or like, the next day, I have a really busy day at work. I'm super stressed out. I still laid my clothes out, but I didn't go for the walk. So you can start to kind of write down the things that you are or you are not doing, the things that precede or that follow the intended behavior. And it's really, again, like that data collection mode. So in the beginning, one of the best things you can do is monitor yourself, right? Is have that own touch point. But also social support is really important in the beginning also. And I know that's a little bit more nebulous when we're talking about negative self-talk because that's going on in your head. But if you take something that's a little bit more concrete, say like going for a walk, you might say to your partner, you might say to your coworker, hey, I'm really trying to go for a walk every morning before I go to work. Can you help hold me accountable for that? Or even just speaking it out loud, saying, hey, I am going for a walk right now. Even if that person's not an accountability partner, just speaking it into the universe and telling another person helps with that degree of accountability. So between self-monitoring and some of that social support, those are two of like the most low-hanging fruit when it comes to starting off a new behavior you want to make more habitual.
Something you said really like hit a chord because I love the idea of you have, let's say I'm going to use the goal for going for a walk every morning where you
Sure.
have your checklist. And let's say your checklist is 5 things. I'm going to do these 5 things every single morning. And it'll take me 20 minutes, whatever it takes. I imagine a Google sheet, a Google Excel sheet, right? Where you have you have the list of items, checkbox, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? And then you can create your own social proof along the way as you do the check boxes. So by the end of the month, you can see, wow, I got my clothes ready the night before 27 out of 28 times. And you can actually see the
Yeah.
social proof. And those right there are micro rewards that you can give yourself, which can then create momentum towards creating the habit and more awareness. Because it's like, okay, oh, I want to see all the check boxes. Or, hey, why did I not do a check this day? What was I thinking? What happened that day? And it almost
Exactly.
like, it definitely leads you towards more of that self-awareness.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like the chore chart that we give to like little kids that
Yeah.
aren't behaving or that aren't doing the things, right? It's like you let them visibly and tangibly see something that they weren't previously aware of, and that can be really helpful. And I will say like let it be whatever tracking method is most accessible and
Yes.
easiest for you. So like if an Excel sheet really speaks to you, amazing. If a notes app is easiest for you, so you can do it on your phone wherever you are, awesome. If a physical journal is what speaks to you because it feels a little bit more like, I don't know, personal and whatever, great. But pick something that like you enjoy doing, and whatever it is, keep it super low friction. You want it to be as easy as possible for you to do that thing. Because the last thing we want is for you to say, like, you're not going for a walk and you're not doing your self monitoring, and then you feel like double crappy about yourself because you're not doing either of the things you said you were going to do. So make it easy. But yes, an Excel sheet would totally work if you wanted to track like 4, 5, 6 different behaviors that maybe proceed or follow whatever the action is.
Would you, okay, so this is controversial. Would you say, and all my psychology friends are like, no, you can't do this, but I'm kind of like, well, it's effective. Maybe. You said you don't want to feel double crappy about yourself if you don't do something. I'll be devil's advocate for 1 second here.
Sure.
What if like you do need that kick in the butt, right? Because you can't always, like, if you're screwing up over and over again, and you're almost like not giving yourself the kick in the butt that you need in order to make that march. Because at some point, if you hire a coach, if you're doing this and it's just you're not seeing results because you're not doing the actions that you said you want to do, at some point, you got to take the pacifier out. You got to start walking. You got to start doing something. Like, you got to start making moves. And sometimes almost being negative to start is a good way to create that spark that goes, okay, I've had enough of this crap. I need to make a change because I'm sick of feeling this way. Is that, I guess, is that real, or am I making that up completely?
You're not making it up completely, right? And
I feel
again,
like I
a
do that.
lot of this, a lot of this is going to be, it depends, right? Some people are going to respond better to that tough love. Some people are not going to respond well to that at all, and that's going to cause them to shut down. So I will say yes, and also potentially
Okay.
no. It's going to depend on the person there. In general, being super negative is not an excellent human motivator. We are a lot more positively
Positive
motivated by,
reinforcement
yeah,
motivated.
exactly. Like when it comes to like any form of like punishment, we're taking something away or we're negatively reinforcing, it's just not as good of a motivator. I'm not going to say it doesn't work for some people. I will say the big thing I remind people of is that like changing your life is hard. If you are currently living a life that is basically the opposite of the one that you want to be living, and you want to make steps towards that, what is right now an alternate reality, that is not going to be an easy thing. And I think that's the big disconnect, is a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to hire a coach and like, poof, it's all going to fall into place. But like, I can teach you the systems, but you're the one that has to actually do the work every single day. And so sometimes that's more of the tough love angle that I will take, is like, hey, not like you should feel terrible about yourself
Well,
because you're
yeah.
not doing these things. And I'm not saying that's what you're doing by any means, but hyperbolically. But it's more like, hey, did you think that this was going to be super easy? Like, where's the disconnect around that? And just really understanding, like, what are the obstacles, or what are the perceived obstacles? Because sometimes I will have clients tell me things that like are big obstacles to them that I'm like, well, that's not really that big of an obstacle. We can overcome that with X, Y, or Z. And it just takes that outside perspective to like narrow it down. So I would say don't like double down on being super harsh on yourself. But if you do need a little bit of tough love, yeah, sometimes you do have to take the pacifier out.
Yes, it's interesting, correct? That you have those two dynamics, and it's like, I have clients who I'm just like, look, you got to do it. Like, I'm not saying be
Yeah.
mean to yourself, but like, look, there's not much more I can do. I've given you everything. We've talked about it. You need to put in the work. I love the hard example you gave. Is like, look, this is hard. And what most people don't realize, from my understanding, is, I asked them a question. Hey, did you think this was going to be easy? Oh no. So you thought it was going to be hard? Yeah. I thought it was going to be hard. Great. This is what hard feels like. And they're
Yeah.
like, and I stole that from Alex Hormozy. So everyone watches him. He said that,
Sure. Yeah.
that this is what hard. It's like, oh, and it's like, yeah, this is what, like, so good. You're like, this is all the right stuff. Like, good. I'm glad you're feeling that it's hard, because this is what it's supposed to feel like. And then sometimes they're able to kind of kickstart it themselves, and kind
Yeah.
of keep moving in the right direction. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting concept.
Yeah. And the thing I will say is like, I don't want anybody to sit here and be discouraged of like, oh my God, it's going to be really hard and it's going to be really hard forever. And like, I don't even want to
No,
start because it's going to feel so hard. It's going to feel hard in the beginning. Like, that's just true, right?
like
Because
anything
again, your
else in the
brain,
world.
yeah, your brain has not reinforced the pathways of the new things that you want to do. But the longer you do these things, the easier they become, because they become more habitual. You start to reinforce those other behaviors. So whereas before, the idea of going for a walk every morning feels impossible because you've never done it before. Well, once you've done it every single day for a few months, you wake up and that's muscle memory, right? You don't have to remind yourself to brush your teeth in the morning. You don't have to remind yourself to put your shoes on before you walk out the door. I will say most of us at least, right? So at a certain point, like I'm now at a point, like I go for a walk every single day when I get back from the gym. Part of that is because I have a dog who would kill me if I didn't do that, but it's just a thing that I do. It's like muscle memory. It's like my day hasn't started until I go for that walk and then come home after it. So it gets easier, but yeah, don't expect it to be like a cakewalk from the very start.
I love that. So what would you say part of succeeding is creating an environment that
Yeah.
is supportive in nature to what you're going for. So I guess the first step is, how do you create, how do you set up your environment for success? And
Yeah.
then how do you overcome a negative environment that you can't necessarily change? I think it's a little overrated to say just change your environment. I think we have
Yeah.
to. There are realities
There's
of the world of
nuances, of course.
where you live, whatever. Like, there are going to be situations. So the question is, how do you make the most out of a negative situation as well? I think that's another
Yeah. No,
conversation.
for sure. Both really good questions. So I'll start the excellent podcast host. It's almost like you do this a bunch of times.
Weird.
No, so I'll start it by saying that like so the reason why it is important to set up your environment to be in line with your goals is because otherwise you're going to have to rely solely on self-control. And this is a big conversation, right? Everybody says I can't do this because I don't have enough self-control. We blame that is the scapegoat most of the time. And the reality is like self-control requires effort. And on any given day, your energy levels are going to vary and you might have varying degrees of self-control depending on your stress levels and how much you slept and what's going on in the rest of the world, right? Like all of those things are going to impact it. But the kind of paradox of it is that there really aren't people that have more or less self-control. There are just people that are better able to set up their environment to align with what they want to do. And so the paradox of it is if you set up your environment such that it aligns with your goals, you end up living in a world where you actually have to exert less self-control. So you think you're showing more self-control because you're doing the things, but really you're just setting up your world so that you don't need self-control all that much.
Interesting. That's a
Yeah.
very interesting way. You basically reverted it because what I believe is, again, I'm open to changing it because that's a very interesting concept. Is like the more you do something, the better you get at it. Like, so
Yeah.
if I do math, I just keep doing it, I'm gonna get better and better and better. If I walk every day, I'm gonna get better at walking, whatever it might be. And so the same can be true. You call it self-control. I call it willpower. I think,
Same thing.
everyone, yeah, I think it's the same
Yeah.
thing. Everyone's got
Self-control, willpower. Yeah. All the same.
all the same. And there is a finite amount of energy that we have all day for our willpower. That's why at night, when our willpower battery is at 1%, it's a lot easier to grab the cookies.
Yeah.
Versus in the morning when you're like, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to conquer the day.
Yeah.
There's that your willpower goes down throughout the day. Part of me thinks, okay, well, if I can get to control it over and over again, I will get better at controlling it, and therefore I can increase my willpower. I do believe that in some regard, but I also love the idea of, well, if I don't buy the cookies, I won't need the willpower,
Yeah.
and I can save it for something else, and I can almost manipulate where my willpower goes to, and therefore I'm not
Yeah.
gaining willpower. I'm just diverging where it gets used. I think that's actually
Yeah.
very interesting.
No, for sure. I'll give you a little bit more of a concrete example because it's not just the only option is not to just not buy the cookies. Because that goes back into the second part of your question, which is like, well, what if you live in a house with kids who
Of
really want
course.
to eat cookies and I can't not have cookies in my house, right? But whenever we want to do something, say we want to incorporate a new behavior, you want to make it as easy as possible to do that thing. And if you want to get rid of an old bad behavior, you want to make it as hard as possible for you to do that thing. That's the basic principle of setting up your environment to align with your goals. So let's take the cookie example, right? That like say the bad behavior you want to break is coming home at the end of the day and immediately diving into the cookies as a result of you being really, really stressed, right? So how do we make it easier for you to grab a healthy snack? And how do we make it harder for you to grab the cookies? So yes, one option might be that you don't buy the cookies. That's usually my tactic. I cannot be trusted with anything in the house. If it is there, I will eat
I
it. I've
agree.
got the most epic sweet tooth. But what's another way to increase friction? Something even as simple of, okay, instead of the cookies being at eye level in your pantry, put them
Yes.
on the top shelf. So
That's
you have to get
best.
to a step stool to go and get it. And sure, you might say like, well, Carly, like I could just get the step stool. I'm going to get the cookies anyway. but it's that little extra bit of friction there that you just might not. You might, and the whole idea is you're not telling yourself, I can't have it. Because the second you say, I can't have this cookie, your desire to eat that cookie is going to go up by like tenfold. That's the forbidden fruit effect. That's why Adam and Eve couldn't not have the freaking apple because they were told they couldn't
Right.
eat it.
Well, also, I
So,
think, not to interrupt, but I think we also
no,
can't
yeah,
think in
interact.
negatives. If I tell you, like, for example, right now, if I tell you, hey, don't think of a giraffe, you like,
Can't,
you
yeah,
can't, I don't think we have the ability to not think of something once we have
you
said the
can't.
thing not to think of. So I think, like,
You can't.
I won't eat the cookies. I mean, like, obviously you could not physically do it, but now you're like,
But
crap.
now you're
Like,
thinking about
now you're
cookies.
thinking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
cookies. Like, you can't, so there's no way around it. I love
Right.
the idea of
And you're thinking
incremental,
about you
yeah.
can't have them. And that's reinforcing more scarcity mindset of like, well, I can only have them right now. So when I do get to have them, I'm going to eat all of them because I don't get to have them the rest of the time. Right.
Yes.
So it's not making them off limits. It's just making it slightly harder to have access to them. And then on the flip side, if you want to not eat cookies, the assumption is then that you'd want to come home and jump into a healthy snack instead. So how do you make that easier? Well, pretty much the opposite of how you make the cookies harder, right? You pre-prepare a healthy snack. You leave it out on the counter for yourself. You put it at eye level in the pantry or at eye level in the refrigerator. You write a note to yourself that you pin to your refrigerator that says, hey, future me, I really want to go for the Greek yogurt right now and not for the ice cream. And you're going to be really glad that you made that decision. Anything you can do to be like, it's easier for me to make this good decision, it's harder for me to make this bad decision, or combination thereof, that's really how you do it.
Another example I've given, and I feel like it has worked. It depends on the food you're gonna get, because sometimes you can't avoid it necessarily. Like, you can't just say, oh, don't buy it. Well, it's not my, I don't control the groceries, whatever it is. Turn the box. If you
Yeah.
turn it away from the front, because marketing, they market it for the front, not for the back. So if you turn the box and you open the cabinet, you're not going to get the same aesthetic effect, and that will also increase the chances that you don't do it as often. So I love that as well. So wow, I
Yeah.
mean, that's great advice.
Yeah. The other piece of it that I will add too is like so many of the behaviors that we do, we are just doing because we're existing on autopilot. So, like, when you come home from work, are you really thinking about the fact that you're immediately making a beeline for the kitchen and running into the pantry? No, you're doing it because the same way you put your shoes on every single day when you leave for work, you are reinforced to come home and do that thing. So, another really tangible and quite easy thing that you can do is just do something to interrupt that autopilot. So if the instinctual behavior is like, I come home, I walk through the kitchen door and I walk right into the kitchen, instead of walking through the kitchen door, right, or the garage door, walk through the front door instead, right? Or go upstairs first and change your clothes before you do that. You just want to do something that's a slight interruption from what your normal routine is, because that's going to stop you from just literally going through on autopilot and not even thinking about the behavior that you're doing. And then all of a sudden you're like halfway through a sleeve of cookies and you're like, how did I even get here?
What happened?
Yeah.
God, there's so much I want to go through still. We're running out of time, but we're gonna go through as much as like we possibly can.
Yeah.
There's a lot. You're giving a lot of great. It's interesting because we believe a lot of the same stuff, and you're explaining it in ways I've never explained it. So I think it's really good for the audience to kind of hear it in a different perspective, because and that's great, because then they can kind of hear, okay, wow, oh, that one clicked, or this one clicked, or, if you want the cheerleader, like, she's a lot better than me at cheerleading. So it's clear. So you talk about something that is called deep health.
Yeah.
What is deep health?
Sure. So
Like, what is that?
yeah, good question. So deep health is basically the way that I define the style of holistic coaching that I do. So I think for most people, when you think of health, it's a pretty low-hanging fruit that you think of your physical health, right? You think of your physical body, whether or not you're going to the gym, probably what you're eating. And now I think mental health also is another kind of low-hanging fruit when we think about health. So most people, if I ask you, are you healthy? Do you consider yourself healthy? You're going to factor in your physical health and your mental health. But the reality is there's a lot more to who you are as a human being besides just the time you spend in the gym, the time you spend in the kitchen, or even the time that you spend in therapy or whatever your self-care habits are. So deep health is like these six main elements of what make up a healthy human being. So we've got the relational component, we've got the existential component, the mental component, environmental, emotional, and physical. So it's all of those things, the intersection of all of those things together that lead you to being a healthy person. And it's about having all of those things in check. So I'm thinking about all of those things when I coach. I'm not just writing you your training plan and giving you your macros and saying, okay, great, go figure it out now. If you nail those things, then you're going to be healthy. If you have those things, but the people in your life don't support you, it's going to be really hard for you to feel like the best version of yourself. If you have those things, but your environment doesn't set you up really well, maybe you're living somewhere that doesn't have access to a lot of walking trails or doesn't have access to a gym, well, then it's going to make it really hard for you to then click into that component of physical health. So it's the methodology that I use for really thinking about coaching and coaching to the whole individual instead of just one more siloed piece of the puzzle.
So yeah, so basically it's just a holistic approach
Holistic style.
to
Yeah, yeah,
coaching. Okay.
exactly.
And you have your six, so I'll call it the 6 dimensions of wellness.
Yeah.
And interesting, very no, it's very if you're familiar with health coaching, they have a very similar um style of coaching. I think they have 8 dimensions of wellness, so it's a little bit they talk about like, and they're not the same. You have different ones too, so it's not the
Yeah,
same.
and
So
I can't take credit for all of the domains there. I learned specifically about this definition of deep health when I did my precision nutrition certification, which
mhm.
is a super interesting one because despite it sounding like you're just coming out of it with a nutrition degree, it's a very holistic style of
Yeah.
certification. And so I think similar to you, it was like that was the way that I was coaching, but I didn't have the verbiage
The
around
name.
exactly what it was. So this I find to be like a much more streamlined way to explain it of like, oh, you're a lot more of a dynamic human being. And I got to consider all of those pieces. So when I do a new like intake with a client, the first thing I do is like an excessive amount of data collection. I want to know not just like your training history and how many calories you're used to eating, but I want to know who you live with and who does most of the grocery shopping and the meal planning in your house and how much do those people support the decisions and the new behaviors that you want to make and where do you live and what's your access to a gym look like and do you see a therapist and what do you do for self-care and how do you manage your stress? It's all of those things together. Because if we go back to the very first question of thinking about like what are the obstacles as part of that WOOP method, right? All of those things are clues into what your unique
Yes.
obstacles are going to be. And so it's breaking down what are all of the things that make you incredibly unique as a dynamic human being so that we have a better understanding of where are your strengths, but also what are the things you're more likely to struggle with so that we can then tackle those together.
I mean, it's just it's about getting all of the pieces to the puzzle, and each one of those things you said, whether it's who has support, the therapy, who does the grocery shopping, when this, who that, whatever. It's all the pieces of the puzzle because you might just be one of those puzzle pieces away from seeing major success after years of struggle because you just didn't know what, like you didn't realize that, oh my gosh, if I had just done this, I could have had so much success earlier on. And basically that's kind of what, year four is. Hey, like I can solve this puzzle for you. uh
Yeah.
yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. So what would be, in your experience, the top reason people don't stick with their workout or the plan that you give them?
Yeah. It's usually not the plan that I give them, but the reason, and I'll explain why in a second, but the reason why most people don't stick to, and this goes for workouts or anything, the reason why they don't stick to it is because it's not sustainable for their lifestyle. So very often, like, and like this is so much more prevalent now with social media, right? And we see like all of the influencers and their workout routines and their full day of eating and all of that stuff, because that's what works for them. But then we try to reverse engineer that and we say, okay, well, I'm going to create my lifestyle that fits around this fitness routine or that fits around this nutrition plan, right? We want to actually tackle it the other way around. You want to create the version of fitness, nutrition, habits, whatever it may be, that actually fits your lifestyle. So the reason why most people aren't consistent is because the thing that they decide to do is not a thing that they could actually do in perpetuity. If you're starting a new routine and you don't think you could see yourself doing that thing for the rest of your life,
Forever. Yeah.
chances are you're probably not even going to do it for the next month, right? It's got to be realistic for you. And that's why I say it's usually not the plan that I give them, because that's the first thing I do is figuring out what your lifestyle looks like so that we can create a plan that is sustainable and realistic for you. And Right. Like I can't tell a single mom of 3 kids that's working 2 jobs that she should be training 5 days a week. That's ridiculous,
Yeah, it
right?
should be
She's
6 days a
never
week.
obviously she'd be able to stick to that a lot better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like she'll never be able to stick to that, right? You might say like, oh, well, you can't make the progress going 2 days a week, but 2 days a week consistently is going to be a hell of a lot better than 5 days a week for one week and then 0 days a week after that because you get discouraged.
Yeah, 100% agree. I mean, there's a lot to unpack with that one because it's what can you stick to the rest of your life. It's not about, okay, oh, I'm gonna do keto, I'm gonna do paleo, I'm gonna have this. The program itself doesn't innately matter as much as the sustainability of what you're trying to do. And that's where people tend to screw up. They think if I do X, I'm going to see results. And then what happens is they actually might get to the result after a couple months sometimes, and they stop what they're doing and then they revert back to the beginning. And they're like, oh
Yeah.
crap, how did I gain all this weight back? Well, I'm like, well, you never learned the skills to actually do this. You relied on this thing and then reverted back versus let's set it up a way that's sustainable for you. If 1 day a week is all you can do, if 2 days a week is all you can do, great, let's start there. Because as you gain the experience, as you gain the knowledge, and I imagine you agree with this, then more doors will open for you and you will learn more. And eventually, hey, you might be in a season of your life where, you know what, I can do 3 days a week. I can do 4. I can do whatever it might be that you want to do as you learn and gain more confidence and gain more knowledge and experience in whatever it is that you're trying to do.
100%. And it also goes both ways, right? You might start training in a season of life when 5 days a week is realistic, and then transition into a phase of your life when 5 days a week is no longer realistic. And you might have to scale it back. I had to do that myself. Like I used to be a competitive powerlifter and I would train 5 days a week for 2.5 hour sessions. And yes, I was up at 4:30 in the morning, so I could do that before I commuted into the city for my corporate job. But now that I am a business owner and for the last year was also working a full-time job in conjunction with that, 5 day a week, 2.5 hour a day workouts are not it for me anymore. There was a period I had to scale it back to 3 days a week. Now I'm back up to 4 days a week. So it has to ebb and flow with what your life looks like. The other important point that I will make is that if you are miserable in what you're doing, even if you are somebody that has iron willpower and everything, and you're like trudging along doing something that you're absolutely miserable with, chances are when you get to the what you at least thought was that end result, when you get the result that you want, you're probably not going to be all that satisfied with it because it's really not about where you end up. It's about learning to love the process of what you're doing to actually get you there. I can't tell you how many times I've heard it, especially from women, of like, well, I got to the thinnest that I ever was, and I still thought that I was fat. I was still really, really miserable and I wasn't happy, right? It's if you don't like the process, if you don't actually enjoy what you're doing, you're going to get to that end goal and it's not going to feel all that sweet because then you're also going to come to the realization that you have to keep doing it to sustain where you actually got.
I mean, I agree with all of that. That's amazing. And I believe you said you're a power lifter, so I think you have. I think I see a deadlifting bar set up. Do you want to show us some powerlifting? Like, is that like what was it, like 220? What were you doing when you were powerlifting? What was like your what was your PR?
My maxes? Oh
Like, give
gosh, it's
me.
been a
You're
hot
probably
minute.
stronger than me, honestly.
So let's see, my all-time max squat was I think like 265. My deadlift was 330-ish,
It's
and
okay.
my bench is my lagging. The most I ever hit was 150.
Okay,
Yeah, so yeah, I
that's
don't do
pretty
it
good.
anymore. Now it's just a lift for life, but I hit 275 for a 3x5 this morning, so I still got at least a little something something.
There you go. I love it. Awesome. Where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on all of the socials. So I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Moxie Barbell. I definitely am the most active on Instagram for sure. You can also find me at my website, which is just moxiebarbell.com. And from there, if you are interested in learning more about one-on-one coaching, you can schedule a free consult call with me. You can also join my email list, which shameless plug, I literally just relaunched this week. So you can sign up for Moxie Mondays on the website as well to stay a little bit more in touch even than what you can through the socials.
Awesome. And all of that will be, in fact, in the show notes. Carly, any final thoughts before we head off?
Ooh, I guess the biggest thing I would say is like just start, right? That usually is one of the biggest barriers. And I know this time of year being New Year's resolution times, the biggest thing that all of us try to do is like overhaul our entire lives in one shot. So if there's one thing that I can leave you with, it's one, just start, but start small. Pick one thing that you can do realistically, not that's so easy that like you're not going to feel accomplished. Like don't say your goal is drinking 1 sip of water a day. It's not going to make you feel all that good about yourself. But pick one thing that you can reasonably and sustainably do. Start there, get really, really good at that thing, and then build from there. But you got to start somewhere.
Perfect. And don't forget, if you like the episode and love the content, replay it, share it with a friend, subscribe, leave a comment, review, anything that you can do on whatever platform you're listening on, do that. All right. Carly, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the amazing knowledge that you gave us today. And we'll have to do this again, maybe next year or something like that, just to kind of get a rehash and get some more information.
Yeah, I'd love to. It was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Appreciate your time. Thank you.